Welcome to Revise and Resubmit, where we take cutting-edge research and try to break it down so you don't have to. I'm Pavlov, and with me as always,
Nikita.
I bet you haven't thought about too much, and that's how your feelings play into being an entrepreneur. You know, we all know that it's not just about having a great idea, but it's also about really understanding the more emotional side of starting and building a business.
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, this affective revolution, as it's called, is really changing the way that we think about entrepreneurs.
Yeah, we've got this research paper from the Journal of Management that we're going to unpack today. It is dense, but we are going to pull out all those key insights so you don't have to. Ready to get into the feels?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Okay, so first things first. This paper looks at like over 270 other articles on the topic. So it's like we're getting the best of all the current research on emotions in entrepreneurship.
Yeah, it's a really comprehensive overview. And what the researchers did that was really important was they were very careful to tease apart feelings that are just fleeting, you know, kind of like a burst of inspiration on one day, versus tendencies, things that you kind of carry with you long term. You know, are you generally a pessimistic person or an optimistic person? And those are the sorts of things that can really make or break your success as an entrepreneur.
So it's not just about having a good day or a bad day.
No, exactly. It's about the whole spectrum of those feelings and how they impact every single stage of building a business.
Okay, I need an example. How does this actually play out in real life?
So, okay, imagine you're an entrepreneur and you're getting ready to pitch your idea to an investor. You're probably feeling pretty anxious, right?
Yeah, it would be.
Right. So that anxiety, what's interesting is it can actually shape your expectations for how the meeting is going to go.
So, like, my pre-meeting jitters could actually affect how I perceive the outcome of the meeting itself.
Yeah, and then think about what happens during the pitch itself. That's when your passion really comes into play. Being able to convey that enthusiasm, the belief in your idea is so powerful. It can totally win over investors. And it's not just about the numbers on the page, it's about making that emotional connection.
So even if I have a solid business plan, it's really that passion or the lack of passion that can kind of make or break the deal.
Absolutely, yeah. And then think about even after the pitch. So let's say you didn't get all the funding you were hoping for. How you handle that disappointment, whether you let it crush you or whether you use it as fuel to keep going, is going to really impact what you do next.
So it's really about how you manage those emotional ups and downs, because we all know that's part of being an entrepreneur, right?
Exactly. And that's why this research is so valuable. It helps us to understand how all of these feelings and these traits impact an entrepreneur's journey.
Okay, I'm ready to unpack this a little bit more. The paper starts by talking about the entrepreneur themselves, like their inner world, you know, all their feeling.
Yeah. So it talks about how those positive emotions, things like enthusiasm, can actually boost your self-efficacy, so you start to believe in yourself more.
That makes sense. If I'm excited about my business, I'm probably going to be more likely to think I can make it work. But what about the flip side? What happens when entrepreneurs experience negative emotions?
Well, you know, things like anxiety or fear of failure, those can be really debilitating. They can actually prevent people from taking risks, which we know is essential in the startup world.
It's almost like that fear is kind of holding them back from, you know, their full potential.
Exactly, yeah. And it can even make them less likely to even start a business in the first place.
So managing those negative emotions is really just as important as cultivating the positive ones.
Oh, absolutely. But here's something interesting we're accepting. The research also looked at loneliness and the impact it has on entrepreneurs.
Loneliness. I wouldn't think that would be a good thing for anyone, let alone somebody who's trying to build a business.
You're right. And, you know, it can definitely lead to negative feelings and isolation. But, you know, some degree of solitude can actually be beneficial.
How so?
Well, you know, entrepreneurs, they need that time for deep work, for focused thinking. So sometimes having a little bit of alone time can actually help them to tap into their creativity and come up with some innovative solutions.
So it's about finding that balance, right?
Exactly. Too much isolation can be really detrimental, but so can constantly being around people. So entrepreneurs kind of have to figure out what works best for them and create an environment that supports both their social and emotional needs.
That makes sense. It's like finding that sweet spot where you're driven but not totally overwhelmed by all the demands of starting a business. So we've talked about the impact of these feelings on the entrepreneur, but what about the other way around? How do the entrepreneur's characteristics, their skills, their knowledge, their personality, how do those things affect their emotional experience?
That's a really great question, and the researchers looked into that in a lot of detail. So you might think that, having strong skills and knowledge would make an entrepreneur more cautious.
Yeah, like the more you know, the more you might realize what could go wrong.
Right. But that's not what the research shows. What they found is that the more skilled and knowledgeable an entrepreneur is, actually the more passionate they tend to be about their venture.
So knowing more actually fuels their enthusiasm.
It does, and it can also reduce their fear of starting up or failing. It's like having that knowledge gives them a sense of confidence and control, which then makes them more emotionally resilient.
Interesting. So knowledge really is power in this context. What other personal characteristics kind of contribute to a positive emotional experience for entrepreneurs?
Well, this might seem obvious, but self-confidence is a big one. Entrepreneurs who believe in themselves tend to feel good about taking on new challenges. And on the flip side, people who lack confidence might be more susceptible to those negative emotions, things like self-doubt, anxiety.
That makes sense. I mean, if I don't believe that I can succeed, it's going to be really hard to stay positive and motivated. And that brings up another interesting point. This research suggests that certain interventions, like things like meditation, can actually help entrepreneurs to reduce their fear of failure.
That's right. It's not just about who you are inherently, but there are also things that entrepreneurs can do to shift their emotional landscape and cultivate a more positive mindset.
So it's not about eliminating fear altogether, but about learning to manage it.
Exactly. And it's about developing the skills and the resilience to navigate all of the ups and downs that are an inherent part of being an entrepreneur.
This is so fascinating. All right, so we've talked about the entrepreneur's inner world, their characteristics. Now let's get into the different stages of the entrepreneurial journey and see how emotions kind of play out in each one. What's the first stage?
So the first stage is discovery. This is where the entrepreneur has that spark of an idea or recognizes a need in the market.
That aha moment, right? Everybody loves a good origin story. But how do emotions play a role in this stage?
Well, the research found that people who are naturally more positive and passionate are actually better at spotting opportunities. They're like magnets, they just draw in ideas that others might miss.
I love that analogy. It's like they're tuned into a different frequency and they're picking up on signals that other people just aren't seeing. But what happens after they've identified that potential opportunity?
That's when we move into the evaluation stage. This is where the entrepreneur and often investors decide whether that opportunity is actually worth pursuing.
So this is where things get a little more analytical. We're weighing the pros and cons, crunching the numbers, assessing the risks.
Exactly. And perhaps unsurprisingly, happy and optimistic entrepreneurs tend to see more potential and opportunities. They're more likely to really imagine those possibilities and focus on the upside, even when there are challenges.
So those positive emotions are really feeling their vision.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's not just about seeing the world through rose-colored glasses. It's about that ability to think creatively and come up with solutions that other people might not even consider.
Interesting. So let's say I'm pitching my idea to an investor. Does my emotional state during that pitch actually matter?
Absolutely. Your ability to convey passion, that can make or break a deal. Investors are not just looking at the numbers, they're assessing your commitment, your belief in your idea.
So it's about that intangible spark, that sense of conviction.
Well, exactly. And here's something that might surprise you. There's actually a sweet spot for positive emotions when it comes to pitching investors.
Wait, so too much passion can be a bad thing?
It can. The research suggests that if you're overly joyful, it could actually hurt your chances.
Really? Why is that?
It might come across as, naive or lacking in seriousness. Investors want to see that you're excited about your idea, but they also want to know that you're grounded in reality and aware of the challenges.
So again, it's all about finding that balance, that sweet spot between genuine enthusiasm and also a realistic understanding of those potential pitfalls.
Exactly. And that's where self-awareness comes in. You need to be mindful of how you're coming across and adjust your expression accordingly.
Okay, so I've pitched my idea, I've secured funding, and now I'm ready to start building my business. What's the next stage?
So the next stage is exploitation. This is where the rubber meets the road. It's the nitty-gritty of actually bringing that idea to life.
So all the hard work that comes after the excitement of the initial idea phase.
Exactly. And both positive and negative emotions are going to come into play here.
Okay, that makes sense. Positive emotions, things like joy, can fuel creativity and problem solving. But what about those negative emotions? I mean, there are going to be challenges and setbacks, things that might lead to stress, even despair.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But those negative emotions can actually be beneficial too. A little bit of fear can keep you on your toes, prompting you to be more careful and thorough.
So it's about harnessing both the positive and the negative to actually fuel your success.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that emotions are not the enemy. They're a valuable source of information and energy that can help you to achieve your goals.
I like that. So we've covered those first 3 stages: discovery, evaluation, and exploitation. What's next?
Well, this is where things get really interesting. The paper highlights a significant gap in our understanding of how all of these emotional experiences actually impact the entrepreneur over time.
What do you mean?
So, for example, we know that entrepreneurs who are good at regulating their emotions, who can bounce back from those setbacks, they tend to have businesses that grow better. But we don't really know that much about the long-term effects of things like entrepreneurial stress or what happens when you experience repeated failures.
So there's still a lot we don't know about how the ups and downs of building a business actually shape us emotionally over the long term.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important for entrepreneurs to really pay attention to their emotional well-being, to develop those healthy coping mechanisms, and to seek support when they need it.
Yeah, those are great points. We are going to delve into some of those specific strategies for managing your entrepreneurial affect in the next part of our deep dive. Stay tuned. Okay, I'm really starting to get how these affective traits can play a big role. Like if I'm naturally optimistic, that's probably going to affect how I handle challenges and setbacks compared to someone who's more pessimistic.
Yeah, exactly. And what's fascinating is these traits can really influence every stage of that journey, from spotting opportunities to building your team.
This is making me rethink my whole approach. So we've talked about feelings and how they impact the entrepreneur's own characteristics, like their skills and knowledge, and those stages, discovery, evaluation, exploitation. But I think it's time to dive into some specific emotions. I mean, there's a whole spectrum of feelings that come up when you're building a business, right?
Absolutely. And what this research does that's so helpful is it really highlights the importance of understanding those nuances of each emotion, not just thinking of it as good or bad. So, for example, they found that anxiety, something we typically think of as negative, can actually be a real asset in some situations.
Really? I always thought anxiety was something to just try to avoid at all costs, especially in high-pressure situations like pitching to investors.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel that way, but a healthy dose of anxiety can actually help you to stay alert and focused. It's that feeling that makes you double-check your work, anticipate potential problems, make sure you're prepared. Think of it like your internal quality control system.
So it's almost like that little voice saying, hey, wait a minute, did you think about this?
Exactly, yeah. A reminder to stay vigilant and not get complacent. But of course, like anything, there's a tipping point. Too much anxiety can be paralyzing and keep you from taking action or making decisions.
Right, finding that balance is crucial. So anxiety, in moderation, can actually be a good thing for entrepreneurs. What about fear? I imagine that's a big one for a lot of people.
It is a big one, and the research confirms that, fear of failure can make people less likely to start a business in the first place. But remember, knowledge is power. The more knowledge and experience you have in your field, the less afraid of failing you're going to be.
So you're saying that, doing my research, building my skills, and learning from others can actually help to reduce that fear.
Absolutely, yeah. And you know what else can help? Prior experience with failure.
Wait, so you're saying if I fail, it actually makes me less afraid of failing in the future?
In a way, yeah. It's like that saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. When you've actually been through it and come out on the other side, you realize it's not the end of the world. You learn from those mistakes, you adapt, and you become more resilient.
I like that perspective shift.
Yeah.
So we've talked about anxiety, fear in moderation can be a good thing. What about some of the more positive emotions like joy and enthusiasm?
Those are powerful forces for sure. Joy, for example, has been linked to better opportunity evaluation.
So if I'm feeling happy and optimistic, I'm more likely to spot a good business opportunity.
Exactly. Joy can really open up your mind to new possibilities and help you to see the potential in something that other people might miss. It's like you're wearing those rose-colored glasses that allow you to see the world in a more positive light.
I like that. Now, what about enthusiasm?
Enthusiasm is contagious. It's that energy that can inspire not just yourself, but also your team, potential investors. Think about some of the most successful entrepreneurs. They tend to just radiate enthusiasm, don't they?
They do. Like,
Yeah.
they're so passionate about what they're doing that it just spills over into every aspect of their life.
And that's magnetic. It draws people in and makes them want to be a part of what you're building.
So it's not just about, feeling good. Cultivating those feelings of joy and enthusiasm can actually be a smart business strategy.
Exactly. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about an emotion that doesn't get as much attention, and that's regret.
Regret. How does that factor into the entrepreneurial experience?
Well, as an entrepreneur, you're constantly having to make decisions, often with incomplete information. And, sometimes those decisions just don't pan out the way you hoped. That can lead to some pretty intense feelings of regret.
Yeah, that feeling of, if only I had done things differently. But how does regret actually impact entrepreneurs?
Well, the research suggests that anticipating regret can actually influence our decision making. So if we're worried about making a choice that we'll later regret, we might be less likely to take a risk, even if it's a calculated risk.
So the fear of regret can actually hold us back.
Exactly. It's a form of risk aversion. But sometimes playing it too safe can also prevent us from reaching our full potential.
So it sounds like it's important to acknowledge the possibility of regret, but not let it paralyze us.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between, taking calculated risks, but also making decisions that ultimately align with your values and your goals. So we've been talking about emotions, but the research also gets into something called moods, which are a bit different.
Okay, how so?
Think of moods as less intense, less specific. It's more like a background feeling that kind of colors your perception and influences your behavior in a more subtle way. So it's the difference between like a sudden burst of anger and just a general feeling of grumpiness.
So it's more about the overall emotional tone rather than a specific feeling tied to a particular event.
Exactly. And while moods might seem less powerful than emotions, they can still have a big impact on how we operate as entrepreneurs.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Imagine two entrepreneurs evaluating the exact same business opportunity. One's in a positive mood, feeling optimistic and hopeful. The other is in a negative mood, feeling stressed and pessimistic.
Well, I'm guessing the entrepreneur in a positive mood is probably going to be more likely to see the potential in that opportunity, right?
You got it. They're more likely to focus on the upside, to think more creatively about solutions, and to just feel more energized and motivated to take action. That entrepreneur in the negative mood might be more likely to focus on the downsides, to get bogged down in the details, to feel hesitant or discouraged.
So even if they have all the same information, their mood can really impact their decision making.
Absolutely. It's like they're looking at the same world through completely different lenses. And that's why it's so important to just be aware of our mood and how it might be influencing our perception, our actions.
So if I'm feeling kind of down or stressed, it might be a good idea to take a break, do something to lift my spirits, and then come back to that decision with a fresh perspective.
That's a great strategy. Sometimes all it takes is a little mood booster to shift our thinking and open us up to new possibilities. Okay, so we've talked about moods. Now let's talk about something called sentiments. What are those, and how do they factor into entrepreneurship? Sentiments are like these enduring emotional attachments. They often develop over time, and they're directed towards specific objects or contexts.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Think about an entrepreneur's love for their product or their passion for their mission. These are deep, lasting feelings that go beyond just a fleeting emotion. They're often rooted in values and beliefs, and they can be incredibly powerful motivators.
So they're like the driving forces behind the entrepreneur's actions and decisions.
Exactly. They can fuel that unwavering determination to succeed, that willingness to persevere even when things get tough. Sentiments can also shape how you interact with other people, influencing things like your hiring decisions and your leadership style.
So for example, if you have a strong sentiment of trust toward your team, you're more likely to create a really collaborative and supportive work environment.
Exactly. Sentiments can have this ripple effect throughout the whole organization, shaping company culture and that overall employee experience.
This is fascinating. It makes me realize there's so much more to being a successful entrepreneur than just coming up with a great idea or having a good business plan.
Absolutely. It's about understanding that human element, the emotional dynamics that really underpin every interaction, every decision.
Now, one sentiment that seems to go hand in hand with entrepreneurship is passion. We can't really talk about building a successful business without talking about passion, right?
You're absolutely right. Passion is often seen as, the fuel that drives entrepreneurs to take risks, to put in those long hours, to overcome challenges. But what's interesting is that the research actually distinguishes between different types of passion.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So the paper talks about two different types of passion: harmonious passion and obsessive passion.
What's the difference?
So harmonious passion is like that healthy, balanced form of passion where you're deeply engaged in your work, you're excited about what you're doing, but you're also able to maintain a sense of perspective. You have a life outside of work, you take care of yourself, you're able to step away when you need to recharge.
So finding that sweet spot between being passionate about your work and not letting it consume you.
Exactly. Now, obsessive passion is more like an addiction. The work consumes you, often to the detriment of other areas of your life. You're constantly thinking about your business, maybe neglecting relationships, putting your health at risk.
That sounds pretty unhealthy, both physically and emotionally. But doesn't that kind of obsessive passion sometimes lead to great success?
It can, at least in the short term.
Yeah.
But it's often not sustainable over the long run. It can lead to burnout, stress, anxiety, even physical health problems. And it can damage relationships and create a real imbalance in your life.
So while passion is clearly an important ingredient, it's important to cultivate the right kind of passion.
Exactly. Finding that balance between, being driven but not consumed by your work.
This is all so insightful. Okay, so we've covered moods, we've covered sentiments. What about that last category? Affective traits. Why are those important for entrepreneurs to understand?
So think of affective traits as kind of like personality characteristics that shape how we experience and express emotion. They're the inherent tendencies that make some people naturally optimistic and others more prone to anxiety.
So it's like our default emotional setting, so to speak.
Exactly. And these traits, they can have a huge impact on every aspect of our lives, including how we navigate the entrepreneurial journey. So, for example, someone with a high trait of positive affect, they're going to be more resilient in the face of challenges. They bounce back from setbacks easier, maintain a more positive outlook, and they don't let those negative emotions get the best of them.
That makes sense. So even if they're facing the same challenges, somebody who's more naturally optimistic is going to have a different experience than someone who leans toward pessimism.
Exactly. Their emotional responses are going to be different, which can influence their decision-making, their problem-solving, their whole approach to the business.
So understanding your own affective traits is really important for self-awareness and then ultimately for making more informed choices about your business.
Exactly. It's about knowing your strengths and weaknesses and then coming up with strategies to leverage those strengths and mitigate those weaknesses. If you know that you're prone to anxiety, for example, you can develop coping mechanisms to manage that anxiety and prevent it from holding you back.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here: emotions, moods, sentiments, personality traits. But I'm curious, how does all of this research translate into practical advice for entrepreneurs? What can they actually do with these insights?
That's a great question, and that's exactly what we're going to cover in the last part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the emotional side of entrepreneurship. We've gone through all the research, some surprising things we've learned along the way, and now I think it's time to get practical. What are the big takeaways that entrepreneurs can use to, manage all the emotional ups and downs and actually build a business that thrives?
If I had to boil it all down, I think the most important thing is self-awareness. We've been talking about it throughout this whole conversation, but it really is the foundation for, everything else.
So understanding my own emotional tendencies, what my triggers are, my strengths, my weaknesses.
Exactly. It's like taking inventory of your emotional toolkit, right? Once you know what you're working with, then you can start to develop those strategies to use those tools more effectively.
So if I know that I get super anxious, for example, before big presentations, I can practice things like deep breathing exercises, or maybe do some visualizations to manage that.
Exactly. Or, if you're aware of what really triggers your passion and your creativity, you can actually set up your environment to kind of, cultivate those feelings when you need them.
Okay, so being proactive, not just reactive. Now, what about external support? We know entrepreneurship can be a pretty lonely journey.
Yeah.
How important is it to have a strong support system?
Oh, it's crucial. Having people you can really trust and rely on is essential for navigating all those emotional ups and downs that come with building a business. That support system could be mentors, fellow entrepreneurs, friends, family, even a therapist.
Anyone that can help you kind of weather the storm.
Exactly. Building a network of people that you can turn to, it's one of the best things you can do for your emotional well-being as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, so build your team, both inside the office and outside. All right, that's great advice. Speaking of weathering the storm, the research also talked about resilience. How can entrepreneurs build that up, that ability to bounce back from setbacks and just keep going?
Resilience is not just about gritting your teeth and powering through. It's about developing healthy coping mechanisms to deal with things like stress and disappointment and, even failure.
So things like exercise, mindfulness, getting out in nature, anything that helps me kind of recharge and get some perspective.
Exactly. Taking care of your mental and physical health so you can show up as your best self even when things are tough. And remember, failure is just part of the process for, I think, most entrepreneurs. It's not about avoiding it altogether, but more about learning from those experiences and then, coming back even stronger.
Reframing failure as a stepping stone, not a roadblock. I love that. Now, beyond those individual strategies, are there any takeaways for entrepreneurs in terms of how they build and manage their teams?
Oh, absolutely. The research really highlights the importance of something called emotional contagion within teams.
Emotional contagion? You mean like emotions can be kind of contagious, spread from person to person?
Exactly. So if the leader is, constantly stressed and negative, that can create a toxic environment.
Okay, so entrepreneurs need to be really mindful of their own state and how it's impacting others.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not just about managing your own emotions, but also creating a culture of support and understanding within the team.
Creating a safe space where people feel like they can share what they're feeling, talk about challenges they're having.
Exactly. Encourage things like open communication, really listen to your team, have empathy. And remember, passion can be contagious too, so hire people who are really passionate about your mission.
Building a team of people who are, I guess, intrinsically motivated, excited about the work. That's a recipe for success right there.
It is, yeah. And finally, the research talks about the importance of what they call aligning team passion, making sure that everyone is on the same page, working towards the same goals.
Well, having those conversations, making sure that everybody's values and goals are in sync.
Exactly, because when passion is misaligned, it can actually lead to conflict and, really undermine performance. So building a team that's united, that's key.
Well, this has been an incredibly eye-opening conversation. It's clear that emotions play a much bigger role than most people probably realize.
I agree. And the good news is, by understanding and, leveraging the power of our emotions, we can actually increase our chances of not only building successful businesses, but also just creating, a more fulfilling and meaningful work experience.
So the big takeaway here is emotions are not the enemy. They're actually a powerful resource that we can use.
Absolutely.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the fascinating world of entrepreneurial affect. It turns out building a business is a lot more emotional than you might think. Embrace those feelings, use them wisely, and go build something amazing.
And remember, enjoy the ride. It's all part of the journey.
And don't forget to subscribe to Revise and Resubmit on Spotify and Apple Podcasts for more captivating deep dives like this one. And if you're enjoying the show and want to support us in creating more insightful content, consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Every contribution helps us continue this journey of exploration and discovery. Until next time, keep those minds curious, keep questioning, and keep revising and resubmitting.